Gus Fring might seem like the most professional man who ever ran a drug empire. There's a lot more to him than that. Behind his clean apron and corporate smile, to truly get Gus Fring, we need to take a look at the moments that helped make him who he is, and see how his need for revenge affects the way he lives. So let's take a look at the story of Gus Fring, and I promise you, by the end of this video, the character you thought you understood is going to look completely different, because most people only know the version of Gus that Walter White met. The real story starts decades earlier, in a place nobody can actually verify he's from. Here's what I mean. The DEA tried to look into Gus Fring's background. They found nothing. Mike Ehrmantraut, a guy who spent years as a corrupt cop and knew how to dig up information on literally anyone, also tried to trace Gus back to Chile. He found nothing. There are no records of Gustavo Fring existing in Chile before he appeared in Mexico in 1986. And normally you'd think, okay, maybe he's just a regular guy from a poor country with bad record keeping. But Don Eladio, the head of the entire cartel, spared Gus's life specifically because he knew who Gus really was. Hector Salamanca used to call him Big Generalissimo as an insult. Multiple people in this story know something about Gus's past in Chile, and every single one of them is either dead or refuses to explain it.
Ya no estás en Chile.
What we do know is small but revealing. Gus grew up in extreme poverty with at least 2 brothers. When he was around 7 years old, he had a lucuma tree that he tended for food and income because that's how poor his family was. A kid growing fruit to survive. And one day a coati, which is basically a raccoon-like animal, started destroying the tree. So Gus trapped it. But he didn't kill it. He kept it alive. He deliberately prolonged the animal's suffering because he wanted it to pay for what it took from him. He told this story years later while Hector Salamanca lay unresponsive in a hospital bed after his stroke. And the message was crystal clear. I will wait as long as I need to wait, and you will suffer for as long as I decide you suffer. At some point, Gus ended up in Santiago, Chile, where 2 relationships shaped the rest of his life. The first was with Peter Schuler, a German businessman who would later become a senior executive at Madrigal Electromotive, one of the largest multinational corporations in the show's universe. Gus and Peter survived some kind of crisis together in Santiago. The show never tells us what it was. Years later, Gus reminded Peter that the 2 of them once had their backs to the wall. Lalo Salamanca also makes reference to something that happened in Santiago, which means whatever went down there was significant enough that cartel figures on a completely different continent heard about it. The second was Maximino Arciniega. Max was living in the Santiago slums when Gus found him. And what Gus did next tells you more about who he was than any missing government file ever could. He pulled Max out of poverty and paid for his entire education out of pocket. Max went on to earn advanced degrees in biochemistry and chemical engineering. He became a brilliant chemist, and the 2 of them formed a partnership that was both professional and deeply personal.
Tengo 2 licenciaturas, una de bioquímica y otra en ingeniería química.
The wiki classifies Max as Gus's romantic partner, and regardless of how you interpret their relationship, one thing is completely undeniable. Max was the most important person in Gus's life. Together, they moved to Mexico around 1986 and built a restaurant chain called Los Pollos Hermanos. On the surface, it was a legitimate chicken restaurant. Underneath, it was a front for a meth operation where Max was the cook and Gus was the strategist. The name itself, the Chicken Brothers, wasn't just branding. It was about them. Gus and Max were the original Chicken Brothers. And their plan was working until they decided to force a meeting with the one person who could either make them untouchable or destroy them completely. But none of that history matters if you don't understand the single afternoon that turned Gus from a man with a plan into a man with a vendetta that would burn for 20 years. Because what Gus and Max did in front of Don Eladio is the kind of gamble that either makes you a king or gets you killed. And for one of them, it did exactly that. Around 1989, Gus and Max walked onto Don Eladio's estate with a strategy that was either genius or suicidal, depending on how you look at it. They'd been handing out free meth samples to Eladio's foot soldiers, deliberately forcing a meeting with the boss. Their pitch was that Max could manufacture highly pure meth locally, giving Eladio a profitable product he controlled entirely instead of depending on imported Colombian cocaine. With Gus handling the business side, they could generate millions. Eladio didn't see it that way. He saw 2 guys who tried to manipulate their way to his table, and he took it as disrespect. Max, sensing where things were heading, started pleading. He told Eladio that Gus was honorable, loyal, and a genius who could make them all rich. He begged for Gus's life.
Es la persona más leal, más honorable que yo he conocido. Él me salvó del barrio pobre de Santiago.
And while Max was still talking, Hector Salamanca walked up behind him and put a bullet in his head. Juan Bolsa grabbed Gus and held him down on the ground while Max's blood drained into Eladio's swimming pool. Gus couldn't move, couldn't fight, couldn't do anything except watch the person who meant the most to him die 3 feet away. And Eladio let Gus live. All Eladio says is that he knows who Gus really is. That's it. Neither show ever explains what that means, what Gus did in Chile, or why that identity was enough to save his life when Max's wasn't. The leader of one of the most powerful drug cartels in Mexico had every reason to kill him, and whatever he knew about Gus's past was enough to stop him. That mystery has never been resolved. Gus walked away from that estate with Max's blood still on him and a hole in his life that would never close. But he also walked away with something else, a purpose that would organize every decision he made for the rest of his life. So, here's the thing you need to understand about every single decision Gus Fring makes from this point forward. Every restaurant he opens, every distribution route he builds, every relationship he forms with law enforcement, every dollar he launders through Madrigal, every scholarship he funds at the University of New Mexico in Max's name, every visit to the memorial fountain he built for Max in a Mexican village, all of it traces directly back to that swimming pool. The empire Gus eventually constructs isn't just a business. It's the weapon he needs to destroy the people who killed the person he loved. But knowing why Gus wants revenge is completely worthless unless you understand how he went about getting it, because this is where Gus becomes something genuinely terrifying. Most people who want revenge go after their enemy. Gus did the opposite. He spent over a decade making sure his main enemy couldn't die. By the time Better Call Saul picks up his story around 2002, Gus is already the cartel's most profitable distributor. He's out-earning Hector Salamanca, he's got Eladio's favor, and from the outside it looks like a loyal soldier who's simply good at his job. That's the performance. Behind the curtain, every move he makes is designed to dismantle the Salamancas from the inside out, and he does it so slowly that nobody realizes it's happening. When Mike Ehrmantraut, an ex-cop and former Marine with his own grudge against Hector, sets up a sniper rifle to kill him, Gus leaves a note on Mike's car that just says, "Don't." He then meets Mike in a remote location and explains that Hector's death is not in his interest. A bullet to the head, Gus tells Mike later, would have been far too humane. Think about that sentence for a second. This man has been carrying the memory of Max's murder for over a decade, and his position is that the guy who pulled the trigger deserves something worse than death. So, instead of killing Hector, Gus starts using him. He lets Mike attack Hector's transportation business, which makes Gus look better by comparison. Eladio eventually consolidates all cross-border drug transport through Gus's network, which humiliates Hector and triggers a health crisis. Meanwhile, a Salamanca lieutenant named Nacho Varga has been secretly replacing Hector's nitroglycerin capsules with dummy pills filled with crushed ibuprofen to protect his own father from cartel involvement. When the tampered pills contribute to Hector suffering a massive stroke, Gus is right there to administer first aid and save Hector's life. Now think about why. Gus saves the man he hates most because a dead Hector is useless to him. He needs Hector alive, conscious and trapped in his own body so that Hector can watch everything he loves get taken away piece by piece. And when Gus's people discover what Nacho did with the pills, Gus doesn't turn Nacho in. He murders Nacho's partner Arturo by suffocating him with a plastic bag, stages a fake rival gang attack to cover it up, and tells Nacho to his face, "From now on, you are mine." Nacho becomes a forced informant, spying on the Salamancas for Gus under the constant threat that Gus will kill his father if he disobeys. Mike warns Gus early on that fear is not an effective motivator. Gus ignores that advice completely when it comes to Nacho, and it's going to cost him later. Around this same time, Gus recruits Mike properly by laundering approximately $200,000 through Madrigal's corporate structure, so Mike can provide for his daughter-in-law Stacy and his granddaughter Kaylee. The money laundering formalizes what had been a loose arrangement into a real working relationship, and when a doctor demonstrates that Hector might recover additional neurological function, that he might regain some ability to move or communicate beyond the bell, Gus ends the rehabilitation program. He dismisses the specialist. He wants Hector mentally sharp, but physically helpless, aware of everything, capable of nothing. That's the punishment Gus considers appropriate for the man who killed Max. And during all of this, something fascinating happens with Gus's public persona. There's a stretch where Gus is under enormous stress because Lalo is investigating his dead drops, and Gus has to let the DEA seize his own money to protect Nacho's cover as a mole. The financial loss is massive, and while Gus is processing this internally, he channels his anxiety into forcing his assistant manager Lyle to clean the restaurant fryer over and over again. Lyle scrubs the thing spotless, and Gus tells him it's not clean enough. It's this incredibly revealing moment where you see the cracks in the performance. The most dangerous drug distributor in the Southwest is standing in a fast food kitchen at night, making a terrified employee to grease equipment because he can't let anyone see what's actually bothering him. There's a moment during all of this that really crystallizes the Gus and Mike relationship. After Mike gets injured, Gus has him brought to a village in Mexico for medical treatment. It's the same village where the memorial fountain for Max is located, the same village Gus financially supports. And while Mike is recovering there, Gus tells him that he brought Mike to this place because Mike understands what revenge means. He's referring to Mike's past as a corrupt Philadelphia cop whose son was murdered. And this is Gus recognizing a kindred spirit, someone who has lost family and is willing to cross every line to make the people responsible answer for it. That shared understanding of loss is the real foundation of their partnership, not the money. So by this point, Gus has Mike for security, Nacho for intelligence, Madrigal and Peter Schuler for corporate funding, Los Poos Hermanos for cover, and even Lydia Rodart Quayle from Madrigal's logistics division helping him scout locations for an underground laboratory. The machine is running, but the entire operation still depends on the cartel for product. As long as Gus needs their supply chain, he's still a subordinate. Everything I just described falls apart without the one thing that can make Gus completely independent, and the super lab is supposed to give him exactly that. Instead, it nearly destroys everything he spent 15 years building, because the problems start with the man he hired to dig it. Gus needs an underground meth lab excavated beneath Lavanderia Brillante, an industrial laundry that Gus and Lydia have identified as the perfect location. He interviews multiple engineers and selects Werner Ziegler, a German specialist whose proposal is difficult but credible. Mike oversees the construction crew, who are housed in a sealed compound because absolutely no one outside the operation can know this project exists. The build takes months. It's expensive, it's behind schedule, and Werner is slowly losing his mind from the isolation. He misses his wife, Margaret. He starts drinking, and eventually Werner cracks and sneaks out to arrange a visit with her. His escape leaves a trail through a travel wire store, and Lalo Salamanca follows it to Werner's resort. Lalo calls Werner while pretending to be part of Gus's organization, and Werner, thinking he's talking to a colleague, reveals details about the construction project before Mike can stop him. Gus doesn't hesitate. He orders Mike to kill Werner, and Mike, who has grown to respect Werner and considers him a decent man, does it anyway. Because that's how Gus's organization works. Secrecy isn't negotiable, and nobody is indispensable once they become a risk. Here's the problem. Lalo had already tracked Werner down and extracted part of the construction story before Werner was even killed. So when Gus fabricates a cover story claiming Werner was building a chicken farm refrigeration system, that he stole cocaine, and that Gus had to replace his supply with inferior local product, Lalo already knows more than Gus realizes. Lalo accepts the explanation to his face. He does not accept it in his head. And Gus, sensing that Lalo isn't buying it, suspends construction on the lab entirely. Before I get into what Lalo does next, there's a detail that makes this whole sequence hit different. After Werner is killed, Gus takes Gail Bödischer, a young chemist who was funded by the Max Arciniega Chemistry Scholarship at the University of New Mexico, and shows him the unfinished lab. Gail is going to be the cook. The scholarship Gus created to memorialize Max is now feeding directly into the production facility designed to avenge Max's death. Everything connects back to that pool. But everything about the super lab, the construction, Werner's selection, the cover story, all of it becomes background noise once you understand the threat that's still active. Because Lalo Salamanca is the first person in this entire story who challenges Gus not with brute force or cartel hierarchy, but with investigation. An investigation is the one weapon Gus's carefully constructed identity cannot survive. Lalo keeps pulling at the thread. He's not trying to kill Gus through violence alone. He's building a case to bring directly to Don Eladio, one that would strip Gus of cartel protection and expose his entire operation. Gus responds the only way he can. He sends a team of assassins to Lalo's compound in Mexico and has Nacho, his captive informant, open the gate for them in the middle of the night. It's supposed to be the end of the Lalo problem. Lalo kills all but one of the assassins, then forces the surviving man to report back that the hit succeeded. He lets the entire cartel believe he's dead. Then, instead of coming back loud, he goes quiet. Meanwhile, Nacho is stranded, and Gus doesn't just refuse to rescue him. He actively sets Nacho up as the cartel's scapegoat, planting documents that reveal the motel where Nacho has been told to hide so the Salamancas can track him down. Mike pushes back, but Gus won't budge. Eventually, Nacho is cornered, and in one of the most gut-wrenching scenes in either series, he uses the one card he has left. He negotiates with Gus's people for his father Manuel's safety, knowing that his staged confession will protect Gus's cover in exchange. He stands in front of the cartel, publicly tells Hector that he was the one who swapped the pills and caused the stroke, condemns every cartel figure in front of him, and then grabs a gun and shoots himself before the Salamancas can execute him. Nacho dies on his own terms, knowingly shielding the man who enslaved him, because it was the only way to protect his father. Mike had warned Gus that fear is not an effective motivator. Nacho's entire arc proved him right, because Gus got what he needed from Nacho, but only because Nacho chose to give it, not because Gus's threats actually worked. Most of the cartel believes Lalo died in the attack, but Hector knows Lalo survived because Lalo contacts him directly, and Gus eventually deduces the truth from Hector's behavior. Lalo is alive, he's furious, and while everyone thinks he's dead, he travels to Germany, tracks down Werner's widow, steals a commemorative gift that leads him to a member of Werner's crew, and forces the man to confirm what he already suspects about the hidden construction project. Then he secretly returns to Albuquerque to finish what he started. What follows is weeks of paranoia for Gus. His home is connected by a hidden underground passage to a surveillance house across the street where Mike's men run round-the-clock security. He uses a body double, and during all of this, he quietly prepares a contingency. He visits the unfinished lab, hides a revolver inside the tire tread of a construction vehicle, and rehearses the route he would need to follow in the dark after cutting the lights. He is literally counting his steps in case he needs to fight for his life underground. Lalo eventually shows up at Jimmy McGill and Kim Wexler's apartment, shoots Howard Hamlin, a lawyer who has absolutely zero connection to Gus or the drug trade, and sends Kim to Gus's house as a diversion. Mike's security team intercepts Kim, which tells Gus that Lalo's real target isn't the house, it's the lab. Gus removes his tie, because he knows what's coming, and heads to the laundry. When Lalo forces Gus down into the unfinished excavation at gunpoint and starts filming evidence to send to the cartel, he tells Gus that he thought he was building an empire, but really, he built himself a tomb. And in a way, Lalo is right about that. He just doesn't realize the tomb is about to be his own. Gus cuts the power. The lab goes pitch black. Gus reaches the revolver he hid weeks earlier and shoots Lalo through the throat. Mike's crew buries Lalo Salamanca and Howard Hamlin together beneath the floor of the unfinished super lab. One is the most dangerous enemy Gus ever faced. The other is a completely innocent man who walked into the wrong apartment on the wrong night and didn't even know who Gus Fring was. Years later, Walter White and Jesse Pinkman cook methamphetamine in the completed version of that lab, standing directly above two undiscovered bodies that represent the true cost of everything beneath their feet. With Lalo dead and Hector's accusations dismissed by Eladio for lack of evidence, Gus orders construction restarted. The lab gets finished sometime between late 2004 and 2009. Gale assembles the equipment. Mike runs security. The empire is complete. But none of that really matters without understanding what Gus actually gave up to get here. Because the scariest part of Gus Fring's story isn't what he built. It's what he refused to let himself have. After everything with Lalo is resolved and Eladio divides territory in Gus's favor, there's this one scene in Better Call Saul that changes how you see Gus entirely. He's sitting in a wine bar with a sommelier named David. They're talking about wine, they're sharing a drink, and the subtext of the conversation is unmistakably warm. For what might be the only moment in the entire franchise across both shows, Gus Fring looks like a person who could have a normal life. Someone who could sit with another human being and just exist without calculating the next move. Then his expression changes. Something shifts inside him. Whatever door cracked open for a second just closes again. And he leaves the bar before David comes back to the table. That's the whole scene, and it tells you everything. By this point in the timeline, Gus is donating to the DEA, attending charity events, maintaining personal relationships with senior law enforcement officials, and presenting himself to the public as a hardworking immigrant businessman who contributes to his community. He even claims to have children, though no confirmed children ever appear in either show, and the claim may just be another layer of the performance. This is a man who has built the most convincing public identity in television history, and the one time he gets close to letting someone behind it, he walks away. Gus could have built a life after Max. He had the money, the power, the connections, the intelligence. He could have honored Max's memory by actually living. Instead, he honored it by turning every waking hour into a campaign of destruction against the people who took Max away. He created the Max Arciniega Chemistry Scholarship in 1994. He built a memorial fountain in a Mexican village and supported its residents for years. He kept Hector Salamanca alive in a wheelchair, conscious and helpless, specifically so that when the time came, Hector would be aware enough to understand that his entire family and organization had been wiped out. And when Gus finally poisoned Don Eladio and the cartel leadership with a bottle of Zafiro Añejo, he did it beside the same pool where Max bled to death over 20 years earlier. He drank from the poison bottle first to lower their suspicion, knowing he'd need emergency treatment afterwards, because that's how committed he was to making this work in this specific location. He walked back to the exact spot where everything started, and turned it into the place where the cartel ended. The same pool that took Max's blood in 1989 is where Don Eladio died 20 years later, face down in the water with the rest of his leadership poisoned around the estate. That's 20 years of patience for a single afternoon of revenge. But here's where the revenge becomes self-destruction. The same obsession that let Gus build a 20-year revenge campaign is the exact flaw that killed him. After destroying the cartel, Gus visits Hector at Casa Tranquila and tells him that the Salamanca name will die with him, that everyone Hector ever cared about is gone, and that Gus is the one responsible. He didn't need to do this. The revenge was already complete, but Gus couldn't resist. He needed Hector to hear it from his mouth, and that wasn't even their final meeting. Walter White later convinced Hector to stage an apparent attempt to inform the DEA, knowing that Gus's hatred would bring him back, and it did. Gus sent Tyrus to sweep the room first, and Tyrus declared it safe, but he missed the bomb Walt had attached beneath Hector's wheelchair. Then Gus entered personally, intending to finish Hector with a lethal injection. Walt's gamble was never that Gus would refuse to send anyone else. It was that even after sending Tyrus ahead, Gus would still need to be the one to end Hector himself. The man who spent 2 decades demonstrating more patience and discipline than any character in television history could not resist the urge to stand in front of Hector Salamanca one final time. That need to witness, to dominate, to make absolutely sure his enemy knew who won, that's what killed Gus Fring. And that's who he was before Breaking Bad. A 7-year-old boy who kept an animal alive just to watch it suffer. A man who lost the person he loved most and spent every day after that building a machine designed to make the people responsible pay for it as slowly as possible. Someone who had every opportunity to let go, to build a real life, to sit in a wine bar with someone who made him smile, and chose the grudge instead, every time. If you liked this video, you'll love this one right here.